Well, church, how are you doing? That was like that good, huh? All right then. You know, they're saying that it's going to start getting colder as the afternoon progresses, but I've become cynical when it comes to the weather now. And so I'll believe it when I see it. I tell you, guys, it is good to see you. I'm really glad that we get to come together and we get to do this every week. It's one of those blessings that God actually gives us. And it's not just a blessing because I get to get up here and talk about the Word. It's not a blessing because it's through this church that my family has a vocation. It's not that. It's that we get to come together and just be the church together once a week. We get to love on each other. We get to encourage each other. Sometimes we get to challenge each other. Sometimes we call each other out. We're with each other through the good times and the bad times. We're with each other when everything is going perfect and then everything is going awful. It's the church. And I love it. We're going to talk about the church today, specifically the church in Rome. But before we get into that, I got to tell you a story of my nephew Taylor. Lord bless this kid. That's never a good thing to say it like that, right? Because help you. Taylor is a really good kid. We went to Silver Dollar City over the Christmas holiday, and we walked in, and I didn't know this, but my nephew had never ridden a ride in his life. Not a carnival ride. He hasn't even gone on one of those little ponies inside the mall kind of thing. Like, he has never ridden a ride in his life. And so we get to Silver Dollar City. There's lots of rides. And we're going towards Fire in the Hole, which I think is just a really good entry-level ride for anyone. And we had a pretty big smattering of kids. And so we're walking towards Fire in the Hole, but then my daughter Eden says, "Oh, Dad, Fire in the Hole's closed." And I looked at the map, and sure enough, like it was delayed. And so we were really close to it. I don't know if you know Silver Dollar City or not, but we were in the fireman district. And I looked, and I saw this one ride that's an 85-foot tower, and it shoots you up the 85 feet, and then you fall the 85 feet, and you do that 2 or 3 times, and that's the whole ride. And so I looked over at Eden, and I said, "Well, while we're waiting, you want to ride this? It looks fun." And she says, "Yeah, let's do it." And so we go hop in line. There was no line. But then I turn around, and my nephew Taylor is tagging right along. And I looked at him, and I said, "Taylor, I don't know if this one's for you, buddy." And then I looked up at his dad, and his dad says, "Hey, let him." And I said, "Okay." And as we're we had 2 runs before we were on. My brother John looked at me, and he said, "Oh, by the way, this is his first ride." I was like, "Okay, so are you going to go on it with him?" And he goes, "No." Father of the year. So I take Taylor and I put him on one side. I take my daughter Ari, put her on the other side. She rode this as well, but she's ridden rides before. And I'm just there. And I looked over and I said, "Taylor, are you nervous?" And he said, "About what?" I said, "You're about to be shot 85 feet into the air." And he goes, "Uh-huh." But he had never been shot 85 feet into the air, so he didn't know what was coming. And so we lift off, and I'm like, "Well, you're in it now, bud." And it launches. And I'm not even paying attention. I'm looking over at him, and his eyes just like opened up really big. And when it got to the top of the thing, I hear this little voice from my nephew go, "Oh, tickle!" And then we fall. And then we do it 2 more times. Interestingly enough, that kid had no idea what he was getting himself into. Like, no idea what he was about to experience. Thankfully enough, it opened up a whole world for him. He wanted to ride every ride in the park. By the end of the day, he rode Time Traveler. Like, this is our nephew I was amazed. But for him, it opened the whole world. My other nephew, his first ride out of the day, not his first ride in life, but out of the day, he rode... I forgot, Outlaw Run, if you've ridden that. It's really intense. He didn't want to ride anything else the rest of the day. But here's the deal. I tell you that to tell you this. I want to talk to you about the church in Rome. because it's really a fascinating church. But one of the things that happens with the church in Rome, and I think it also happens in the church of today, is sometimes we get and we become part of these things, but we don't know what we're getting ourselves into. And then it gets intense. And we do one of two things. Either the whole world opens up for us and we see the possibility of the church in this world, or we're crazy intimidated and we walk away. The church in Rome. One of the things I love about the church in Rome is that it was not started by one of the apostles. There wasn't a missionary that went to Rome and started the church like Paul did in Corinth. Like, the church in Rome was actually started by those who heard the gospel in their travels and then came back to Rome with their newfound faith. That's how the church in Rome began. For an example of this is in the book of Acts, chapter 2, and at the time of Pentecost. There are thousands of Jews from all over the known world, and they hear the gospel for the first time, and 3,000 of them give their lives to Jesus. And so then they go back to their homes, and they bring their faith back to their homes. And so these Christians, these Jews that went to Jerusalem for a holy feast, now come back to Rome as Christians, and they do what Christians do. They meet together. They started talking. They started doing life together. They started building each other up. And they started sharing their faith. The church was started by those who were impacted by the gospel and then brought their faith back home and took it to the streets. Now it started, they shared their faith with those they knew, and so many of them, as they were Jews, shared their faith in the tabernacles and the temples. They went and they shared their faith with fellow Jews. And then those Jews became Christians, but there were also Gentiles that were part of this, and so they were God-fearing Gentiles, and then they came to a belief in Jesus as well. So now you've got this mixture of Christians in Rome that are both Jewish and Gentile. Now, that's important to understand the issues that were facing the church in Rome. The church consisted both of Jews and Gentiles, but in around AD 49, Emperor Claudius issued a decree kicking all Jews out of the city of Rome. And so the Jews all left. The church didn't leave. The Jews left, and the Gentiles remained. And for 5 years, the church in Rome was made up of Gentile Christians. Now, after 5 years pass, Claudius dies, and then the Jews are allowed a right of return, and so then they come back into the city, and they come back into the church, but now they're coming into a church that's had 5 years of Gentiles reaching other Gentiles, and it's been growing, and it's been flourishing, but then the Jews come back in, and it's almost like this moment of, oh, really cute guys, but the adults are back. And so there's this big struggle. There's this tension that happens within the church in Rome because the Jews came back in and said, there's all of these laws that you're still supposed to follow. You're still supposed to be circumcised. These are the feasting days. These are the things you're supposed to do. And they're trying to add all of these laws into it. And then the Gentiles are coming up from a different perspective and saying, well, what about grace? Like, what role does that play in this? So am I saved by grace or am I saved by following the law? And there was this tension that kept building. And it leads to the question, what do we have to do to know that we are saved? Are we required to relentlessly follow the law, or do we radically trust in grace? How do we know? How can we be secure? And so Paul writes a letter to a church in Rome, to the church in Rome, to address these issues, not just in order to give an explanation of what the gospel is, but also how we walk and how we live in it. And he challenges both Jewish and Gentile Christians that arriving at peace on this issue requires them to rethink how they approach faith. So that's what we're going to do over the next 5 weeks. We're going to rethink. We're going to go through the book of Romans as well as some of the other epistles, bringing in some of the Old Testament scriptures, and we're going to take a look at faith and challenge the way we think about law, sin, grace, hardship, and eternity. And so this week we start with the law. Everybody's favorite topic. I hope you're excited. I am. Here we go. Okay. So the law. Way back in Exodus, God calls Moses on top of a mountain, And he tells him this. It's in Exodus chapter 24, verse 12, on top of Mount Sinai. We got that one? Oh, it's the TV's not on. Well, that's fun. Okay. The Lord said to Moses, you know, it's amazing how much Adam does that we didn't know about until today. The Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and wait there that I may give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandment which I have written for their instruction. I'm just going to go ahead and see if this does something. And if it does, awesome. If not, then we'll keep going. So God calls him up onto the mountain, and he says, come and do this. Not two broke girls. There we go. Okay, well, it was worth a shot. God calls him up on the mountain, and he says, come look at this law that I have given you. Actually, bring it up again really quick, Josh. Let me see if it actually... No, okay, never mind. I was really hoping that was going to work. Which I have written for you. He says, I want to tell you about this law, which I have written for your instruction. That's the way it ends it, right? I have written this law for your instruction. The interesting thing there is the word instruction right there. It's the word yarah. It's a Hebrew word, yarah. And I love it because the word yarah does mean to instruct, but it has a primary meaning. And that primary meaning has to do with archery. It's a word that actually means to aim and shoot an arrow. Yarah. So, next year, archery season, you got a new word to shout. This law was written with a purpose, to aim the people of God at a target. And we're going to come back to this, but I want you to hold on to that thought. The law was given to instruct, to yarah, to aim the people of God at a target. This law was given to the people of God, by God, for great purpose. And even as the years and generations continued from this moment, the law of God persisted. Even when the temple was overrun and the people were taken in captivity to Babylon, as we've been talking about, like even through that, the law persisted. Even then, God sent Nehemiah back to rebuild the boundary walls of the city. But then, sometimes we miss this. He doesn't just send Nehemiah back to build the walls. He sends Ezra back for the sole purpose of getting the temple up and running and then teaching the law to the people. God took actions to make sure that the law was established, that the law continued throughout the people. And so if I can give you one really good point right now, it's this, that God cares about the law. And as we go through this tension between grace and the law, it will become easy to see the law as an enemy that keeps us from God. That's why I wanted to start there. God cares about the law. Romans 7:12 tells us, the law is holy and the commandment is holy and righteous and good. The law is good. God cares about the law, and that's good. But it's also really scary, especially when we read passages like Deuteronomy 27:26. Cursed be anyone who does not confirm the words of this law by doing them. If we go even further to 1 John 2:4, whoever says, I know him but does not keep his commandments is a liar and the truth is not in him. And then when you pair that with Romans 3:10, it says this, as it is written, none is righteous, no, not one. No one understands, no one seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one. Their throat is an open grave. They use their tongues to deceive. The venom of asps is under their lips. Their mouth is full of curses and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood, and their paths are ruin and misery, and the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. And then it gets scarier because then it says this, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So we start with Deuteronomy. Cursed are those who cannot abide in this law. We go to John 2:4. If you say that you know God but you don't follow his law, then that you are a liar and the truth is not in you. And then we get to Romans and this scathing rebuke. And then he finishes it with, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. What I'm getting at, guys, is this. Under the law, all are sinners. No one keeps the law. And so we find ourselves at odds with a law that is both good and cared about by God, a law that is given by God. So one of the questions I have to have as I go through this then is, okay, so how can a law be good if no one can keep it? How can a standard be good if it's so high that no one can ever reach it? Like, how is that indicative of a good God? Does the law exist only to condemn? And if it does, then how could that ever be a good thing? But yet Scripture says that it's good. Wouldn't a more gracious action be to maybe abolish it? And that makes total sense if you're looking at the law as a tool to save you. Because the only way that you're going to get saved is if the law doesn't have any penalty, and so the only way for the law not to have any penalty is for it to be abolished, and so once it's abolished, then I can finally come to God, right? And too often in our lives, we look at the law as a tool for salvation. If I just do good, I will feel good about my relationship with God. I will feel closer to God. If I sin, then I feel insecure about my relationship with God. And so we go back and we go forth and we have these lives that are really spent managing sin. But here's the thing. The series is called ReThink. And today we're talking about rethinking the law. The law was never intended to save you. The law was never intended to save you. The law has never made you a promise of salvation. The law is good. It's just not good as a means of salvation. It's good in its purpose. Just like I can sit there and play this guitar, and it's good being used for its purpose, but if I take it out and try to use it as a tennis racket, it's not going to do as good a job. You get it? It was never meant to be a means of salvation. It was never meant to save you. And when the law is used for a purpose it wasn't created for, it becomes an adversary. It seems to condemn more than it gives peace. And so when we attempt to make the law a source for security and salvation, our peace is no more than a cycle of insecurity where our closeness to God can only be measured by our most recent obedience or failure. So if it's not meant to condemn, and if it's not meant to save, what is the purpose of the law of God? I believe that the law still has a purpose today as it did then, and a great and needed purpose. And so the purpose of the law, I want to suggest that there are two main purposes. In the 7th chapter of Romans, Paul, in talking about the struggle with sin and the goodness of the law, he says this in Romans 7:13. Did that which is good then bring death to me? By no means. It was sin producing death in me through what is good, in order that sin might be shown to be sin, and through the commandment might become sinful beyond measure. So essentially, what Paul says here is that the law exists to reveal sin. That the law exists to reveal sin. Essentially, that's what it is. To give you another example, I've told you the story of my mom before, but when I was in high school, my mom was diagnosed with leukemia. She had an incredibly high blast count. We were very concerned, obviously. But I remember when I got there and the doctor was telling us about her diagnosis, not one of us in the room was mad at the doctor. We weren't mad at the doctor because all the doctor did was tell us about the condition that she already had. That's essentially what the law does for us. It is the doctor that diagnoses the sickness that we already had. So the law is not the enemy. It just means that you are sick. The doctor doesn't put the sickness in us. It's a product of our broken body. All the doctor does is diagnose. So the first thing, the law exists to diagnose our sickness. To point to the sin that's there. But like any good doctor, they don't stop with the diagnosis. They treat for the purpose of bringing about a cure. Remember at the beginning, when the law was first given on top of Mount Sinai, it says that it was for the purpose of instruction. And that word, yarah, that word, that archery word, to aim and shoot. I want to bring you to another verse now in Galatians chapter 3. It says, so then, the law was our guardian until Christ came, in order that we might be justified by faith. That word, guardian, it's a Greek word, paidagogos. Say that 10 times fast? No. But it's a Greek word. It means this. It's a slave that's put in charge of the moral training of the sons of a free man. That's it. As soon as they're old enough to be taken away from their wet nurse, they would go into this guardianship. That's this word. But this slave had 4 responsibilities when it came to the sons of these free men. The first was to protect them from harm. The second was to discipline them when necessary. The third was to instill the virtues of the household. And finally, to escort the boy to the instructor when the time came. That's the word that Paul uses in Galatians chapter 3. That's the word for guardian, which means this, that the law originally was given to instruct and to aim at a target. And then Galatians calls the law a guardian, a temporary caregiver that exists to instruct, protect, discipline, and deliver his charge to Jesus. Both are the same. They both exist to aim the people to Jesus. That's what the law does. It points out sin. It diagnoses our sickness. But then the second thing that the law does is it points us to the cure. So the law was never meant to save you. It is meant to point you to salvation, to show you how sick you are and how you can be cured. One of the things I get to every now and then, I'll have very vivid dreams. Sometimes that's a lot of fun. Other times it's terrifying. No joke. I had a dream just the other day where I realized halfway through it that it was a dream. And I was like, oh, thank God. Because Mallory and I were arguing about something and I didn't want to argue anymore. Like it was one of those kind of dreams. But no, I had a dream one night, though. When I was young, I used to pray that God would give me dreams of what it was going to be like when Judgment Day came. And I would have dreams as a kid where trumpets would sound, right? The moon would turn red. And in these dreams, I would always be filled with the same thought. I'm not ready. I would think about my sin. I would think about all the things that I had done wrong, just even that day. And I would say, wait, God, no, I'm not ready yet. I wanted to be closer to you by this point. I wanted to be better at this by this point. I wanted all of these things by this point. But a few years ago, I had that dream again. But it was interesting. I was standing outside, and then every light went out. I'm not just talking about like street lamps. I'm talking about like light completely just disappeared. And then there was this really loud like foghorn sound. And then this incredibly bright light appeared on the horizon. And I looked around and I saw people that were covering their faces and trying to bury themselves into the ground. But then I saw others that were like me, looking at the light. But here's the interesting part for it. I still remembered my sin in that dream. I still remembered everything that I had done wrong, and in that dream, it was a long list. But the craziest part for me was I wasn't wanting to bury myself in the dirt. I wasn't wanting to hide myself away from God. Instead, as I looked around and I saw these people that were all looking at the light with me, we all started together in one movement, running towards the light. Not because we were worthy of the light, but simply because we knew that at that light there was a cure, and we wanted it. Now, I'm not saying that's how it's going to happen when Jesus comes back. Don't get that. That's not in the Bible. But the cure, the forgiveness, that is. You have a God who loves you intensely. A God who loves you with intentionality. A God who brought His law from generation to generation to generation, and He even puts it in front of us today, not for the purpose of condemnation, but for the purpose of diagnosis. so that we can see how much we need Jesus, so we can see how much we need the cure. And that's what the law does. It diagnoses us where we're at. And we, like Paul, can say, oh, what a wretched man I am. Who can save me from this body of death? But then the law does that second thing. It aims us and it fires us directly at Jesus, where we will receive a cure. The law is not just a list of things to follow. But here's the cool part. When we come to Jesus, when He cures the separation and the sickness that sin has put inside our souls, we then get to follow the law. But now we're not doing it to try to be good enough to be saved. We're not doing it to try to be good enough to have a relationship with God. Now we are following the law because we love Jesus, because of what He has done. And that means that we can follow and still be imperfect. We can still mess up because Christ is the cure, not just for the one time that I come to Jesus, but He is the cure every day. Scripture says His mercies are new every morning. And so we daily walk in the cure of Jesus Christ. And the law continually points us back to Him. That is the good news of the law. Let's pray. God, thank you. God, with all of the fun technical difficulties and everything else, Lord, I just thank you so much that we don't that you are always true, God. That you are always faithful. That you always do what you say you will do, God.